The 7-foot giant's shadow completely eclipsed Clara as she hesitated on the stagecoach step. At 95 pounds, she was trembling like a leaf caught in a Wyoming gale. "You're too small." Jonas McCall's deep voice rumbled, his massive hands flexing at his sides. "But I'll make it fit." Those words, likely intended to reassure her about their life together, instead sent a shiver of ice through her veins. She had fled Boston to escape one monster, only to find herself married by proxy to a man who looked capable of crushing her with a single hand. The stagecoach wheels groaned to a halt on the main street of Ember Ridge, kicking up a cloud of amber dust that drifted into the afternoon sun. Clara Whitfield pressed her face against the glass, her breath fogging the window as her heart hammered against her ribs. She was a bird in a cage, desperate for escape, but terrified of the open sky. Through the haze, she finally saw him. He was a figure so massive, he made the other men in town look like children playing dress-up. Jonas McCall stood by the hitching post, his broad-brimmed hat casting his features in shadow. But Clara didn't need to see his face to understand the sheer physical impossibility of the union that awaited her. He was a mountain of a man 7 feet of muscle and bone wrapped in worn leather and denim. "Ma'am," the driver's voice cut through her paralysis. "This is your stop." Clara's hands shook as she gathered her single carpetbag, her entire life condensed into worn fabric. The other passengers, a preacher's wife and 2 salesmen, watched her with a blend of pity and morbid curiosity. They knew, everyone knew, about the tiny Boston bride and her giant groom. "Courage," she whispered to herself, invoking the word her mother had spoken on her deathbed. "Courage is not the absence of fear, Clara. It is moving forward despite it." She descended the steps, her button boots touching Wyoming soil. Jonas moved toward her. For someone of his size, his grace was surprising, each step measured as if he were approaching a startled deer. As he drew closer, Clara had to crane her neck back to look up at him. The sun behind him turned him into a silhouette, a dark titan against the blazing sky. "Mrs. McCall?" His voice was as deep as a canyon, but laced with an uncertainty that matched her own. "Clara," she corrected, her voice barely audible. Up close, she realized his boots were the size of 2 of hers combined. His hands, hanging loosely at his sides, were large enough to encompass her entire waist. One wrong move, one flash of anger, and he could snap her like a dry twig. "You're smaller than I expected," he admitted, then winced. "I mean, your letters didn't mention." He pulled off his hat, running a hand through his dark hair. "Hell, I'm making a mess of this already." Despite the terror gripping her chest, Clara found a spark of resolve. "I am exactly as large as I need to be, Mr. McCall." A smile ghosted across his weathered features. "Jonas," he corrected gently. "And you're right. I apologize. May I?" He gestured to her bag. When she nodded, he lifted it with 2 fingers as if it weighed nothing at all. "The preacher is waiting at the church," Jonas said. "Unless you'd prefer to rest? The ceremony can wait, but we were married by proxy." "The papers are legal," Clara squeaked. "Yes, but Reverend Matthews insists on blessing the union in person. He says it's only proper given the unusual circumstances." "Unusual?" Clara almost laughed. A Boston socialite fleeing to the frontier to marry a stranger who could use her as a toothpick was certainly unusual. "The whole town is gathered," Jonas added, a note of apology in his tone. "I tried to keep it quiet, but Ember Ridge doesn't get much entertainment." "They're curious. About the freak show?" Clara blurted out. Jonas's jaw tightened. "About us," he corrected firmly but gently. "But if you aren't ready, no." Clara straightened her spine, utilizing every inch of her 5-foot frame. "Let them look. Let them see that Clara McCall doesn't run from whispers." They walked through town together, an odd procession that drew every eye. Clara heard the whispers trailing them like tumbleweeds. Lord Almighty, she barely reaches his elbow. How is that supposed to work? Poor little thing, she has no idea. Jonas positioned himself between her and the gawkers, his broad shoulders acting as a shield. Inside the church, a hush fell over the congregation. As they stood before the altar, the contrast was stark. Jonas had to stoop slightly to fit beneath the modest ceiling, while Clara barely reached his rib cage. During the service, a loud whisper drifted from the back. God help her on the wedding night. Heat flooded Clara's cheeks, but Jonas turned, his voice booming to every corner of the room. Anyone who has something to say about my wife can say it to me now, or they can hold their peace. The silence was absolute. When the time came for the kiss, Jonas bent down far down and pressed his lips to her forehead with such extreme caution it felt like the brush of a moth's wing. "Welcome to Ember Ridge, Mrs. McCall," he murmured outside. After the ordeal, Jonas let out a long breath. "I apologize. They aren't bad people, just human. And humans stare at what they don't understand." He looked at her with surprisingly gentle brown eyes. "We make quite the pair, the giant and the fairy. I prefer to think of us as a study in contrasts," Clara replied, surprising herself. Jonas laughed, a rusty sound. "I like that. Ready to see your new home?" The wagon ride took them through a landscape of gold and green that stole Clara's breath. Mountains rose in the distance like sleeping giants. After a long silence, Jonas spoke. "Ask whatever you're thinking. Your face is like a book. Why a mail-order bride?" She asked honestly. Surely there were local women. Jonas's expression darkened. "A man like me? People assume things. That I'm violent, brutish. When I was 17, I pulled some boys off my sister. I broke an arm and some ribs. I didn't mean to. I just didn't know my own strength. Since then, parents cross the street when I come near. I figured a woman desperate enough to answer an ad might overlook the ... packaging. I answered because I needed a home," Clara said softly. "Well," Jonas said as the ranch came into view, "I've tried to make it one." The house was modest, but well built. But what caught Clara's eye were the modifications. A smaller set of steps ran parallel to the main porch stairs. In the kitchen, visible through the window, counters were set at lower heights. "I've been preparing since your first letter," Jonas admitted shyly, "trying to make things accessible. A home should fit everyone who lives in it." Clara felt something crack inside her chest, the wall she had built against hope. This man, whom everyone feared, had spent weeks rebuilding his world to welcome her. Jonas came around the side of the wagon to help her down, and that was when the sheer physical reality of their marriage truly struck Clara. As he reached up, his massive hands spanned her entire waist with room to spare. He lifted her from the seat as if she weighed no more than a bag of feathers, yet he set her down on the dusty ground with infinite care, treating her like a porcelain doll that might shatter at the slightest impact. "I won't break, Jonas," she said, though her voice wavered slightly as she smoothed her skirts. "I know," he replied, his hands lingering for a split second to steady her. "But I would never forgive myself if I was careless. You don't know how easy it would be for me to... Well, let me show you the house." The interior was a revelation. It wasn't just the cleanliness or the quality of the craftsmanship. It was the thoughtful engineering. In the kitchen, he had built a secondary counter at a significantly lower height, with clever steps that pulled out from the bottom of the cabinets. The dining table featured 2 chairs, one massive, reinforced with iron bracing, and one perfectly sized for her. He led her to a room down the hall. "This is yours," he said. Inside, a beautiful wooden wardrobe featured wildflowers carved into the doors with delicate precision. "You made all this?" Clara ran her fingers over the smooth wood, tracing the petals of a columbine. "I'm good with my hands," Jonas mumbled, a blush rising up his neck. "Woodworking, I mean, not delicate things usually." "It's beautiful," she said softly. "I've never had anything made just for me before. And the room—" "It's yours," he added quickly, stepping back into the hallway. "I know the marriage is legal, but I don't expect, that is, we can take time. You have your privacy." Relief flooded through her, followed by a pang of gratitude. "Thank you, Jonas." That evening, they sat at the mismatched table for a dinner of beef stew. It was rich and hearty, and Clara learned that Jonas had been cooking for himself since he was 19. As they ate, the silence of the vast Wyoming night pressed against the windows. But inside, the conversation flowed with surprising ease. She told him of Boston, of the suffocating society parties, and the library that had been her sanctuary. He spoke of the ranch, of the isolation that sometimes felt heavy enough to crush a man. "Why me?" she asked again, watching him over the rim of her cup. "Why not just stay alone?" "Loneliness," he answered simply. It gets so quiet out here. Forget the sound of my own voice. My parents had a partnership. Even in hard times, they had each other. I wanted that. But I knew a photograph of me would send most women running. I hoped that if we wrote letters first, if you got to know mine before you saw my body, maybe the rest wouldn't matter as much." That night, a knock at her bedroom door made her jump. Jonas stood there, ducking to fit the frame, holding a stack of colorful quilts. "My mother made these," he said, offering them to her. She was small, too. "My father was a big man, not like me, but big. She used to say, God matched them up to prove opposites attract." "How did they make it work?" Clara asked, taking the heavy bedding. "Love, patience, and a lot of laughter," Jonas said, a fond smile touching his lips. "She taught me to read, too. Think, and to realize that being different wasn't the same as being wrong. I'll let you rest now, Clara, and thank you." "For what?" "For not running, for giving this a chance." The next morning, Clara woke to the sound of heavy footsteps. Even though Jonas was clearly trying to be quiet, the floorboards groaned under his weight. She dressed in a practical brown wool dress and went out to the kitchen. Jonas was at the stove, wearing an apron that looked comically small on his broad chest. "Morning," he rumbled without turning. "How do you take your eggs?" "Over easy, if you can manage it," she said, stepping closer. He glanced over his shoulder, grinning. "I can manage most things that don't require threading a needle. That's beyond me." "I can handle the needlework," Clara offered. "We'll make a good team." After breakfast, he took her on a tour of the ranch. He had modified an old side saddle to fit her, and watching him work with the horses was mesmerizing. The massive animals, skittish with strangers, calmed instantly under his touch. "They aren't afraid of you," she observed as they rode along a ridgeline. "Animals judge by intent, not appearance," Jonas said. "People could learn a thing or two from them." They stopped by a stream to water the horses. Jonas skipped a stone that flew an impossibly long distance before skipping across the water. "My mother was a schoolteacher," he told her. She made sure we were educated. Said a mind was a terrible thing to waste, no matter the size of the body carrying it. My father fell for her the moment he saw her, but she made him prove he had more than muscles. He used to leave poems on her desk. He sounds like a romantic. He was, Jonas agreed. He knew he had to be gentle to win her. As they rode back toward the house, Clara insisted on knowing her duties. "I'm your wife, Jonas, not a guest." The advertisement said you wanted someone unafraid of hard work. You don't have to do the heavy lifting, he argued weakly. I'll handle the garden and the poultry, she decided. You handle the cattle. He laughed, a deep, rumbling sound that seemed to vibrate in the air. Deal, but if a chicken gives you trouble, you call me. I think I can handle a chicken, Mr. McCall. We'll see, he teased. Some of those hens are meaner than they look. For the first time since leaving Boston, Clara felt a true smile touch her face. She watched him easily lift a fence post that would have taken 2 normal men to move, and she realized that his strength, once the source of her terror, was now being used entirely to build a life for her. That night, the Wyoming sky tore open. A storm rolled down from the mountains with a violence Clara had never witnessed in Boston. Thunder shook the very foundations of the house, and lightning turned the night into a throbbing, terrifying day. Huddled in her bed, Clara couldn't suppress a cry when a particularly loud crack seemed to split the roof directly overhead. Within seconds, Jonas was at her door. "Clara, are you all right?" "It's just the storm," she called out, though her voice betrayed her trembling. "May I come in?" When he entered, ducking sideways to clear the frame, the flashes of lightning cast his massive shadow across the walls. Yet strangely, his presence didn't add to the fear. It banished it. He looked solid, immovable, a mountain that no storm could shake. "Boston storms aren't like this," he said softly, seeing her pale face. "No," she whispered, "nothing like this." "Would it help if I stayed? I can sit in the chair." "Please," she said. He folded his 7-foot frame into the wooden chair in the corner, looking absurdly large for the furniture, yet he settled in without complaint. To distract her, they talked through the thunder. He told her about getting stuck in a mine shaft as a boy because he hadn't realized how much he'd grown, and how that moment taught him he would always be too big for the world. Clara reached out from under the covers and touched his hand resting on his knee. Her entire palm disappeared within his grasp, but his skin was warm and rough with calluses. "You aren't afraid of me," he noted, sounding almost bewildered. "Should I be? Most people are." "I am not most people." By morning, the storm had washed the world clean. They fell into a comfortable rhythm after that. Jonas would handle the heavy labor, while Clara took over the household and the smaller livestock. There was laughter, too, mostly Jonas laughing. At Clara, one afternoon, he found her chasing an escaped hen in circles, red-faced and out of breath. He stepped in, scooped the bird up with one hand as easily as if it were a pinnacone, and grinned. "You are doing well," he teased, his eyes crinkling. "I think you almost had her." Clara threw a handful of feed at him. It bounced harmlessly off his chest, but the sound of his laughter, deep and free, was the best reward she could have asked for. However, the town remained a cold place for them. Their weekly trips for supplies were exercises in endurance. Clara noticed how Jonas shrank in on himself when they hit Main Street, hunching his shoulders and keeping his eyes on the dirt to avoid frightening anyone. "You shouldn't have to do that," she hissed after a mother yanked her children away from him on the boardwalk. "It makes them comfortable," he muttered. "What about your comfort?" But Clara wasn't one to shrink. When Mrs. Henderson, the town gossip, made a loud comment about Beauty and the Beast as they passed the general store, Clara stopped cold. She turned, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "How interesting, Mrs. Henderson," Clara said pleasantly. "You reference a tale where the beast turns out to have the kindest, truest heart of them all. Though I suppose understanding the moral requires actually reading the story, not just repeating mean-spirited gossip." Mrs. Henderson flushed a deep crimson, and Jonas had to fake a coughing fit to hide his amusement. The confrontation drew attention. The following Sunday, Mary Sullivan, the banker's wife and the unofficial matriarch of Ember Ridge, approached them after the service. She was a stern woman with steel-gray hair. "Mrs. McCall," she said, ignoring Jonas entirely. "I'm hosting a quilting bee Thursday. We could use another pair of hands. 2 o'clock sharp." "That's kind of you," Clara began, feeling Jonas tense beside her. "Bring your thimble," Mary interrupted, then swept away. "She's testing you," Jonas warned on the drive home. "Those bees are just excuses to pry. They want to know about our marriage. Let them ask," Clara said, lifting her chin. "I have nothing to hide." When Thursday arrived, the atmosphere in the Sullivan parlor was thick with unspoken questions. 6 women sat in a circle, needles flashing. Mrs. Henderson was there, of course, and she didn't wait long to strike. "Your husband seems to be managing the ranch well, for a man of his stature," she began, her eyes glittering with malice. "But surely the accommodations must be challenging inside a normal house. Everything must be so mismatched." The room went silent. The innuendo hung heavy in the air. Everyone knew she wasn't asking about the furniture. Clara set down her embroidery hoop with deliberate calm. She looked Mrs. Henderson dead in the eye. "Are you asking about my marriage bed, Mrs. Henderson?" Gasps rippled through the circle. "Because—" "If you are," Clara continued, her voice sweet but deadly, "I must disappoint you. My mother raised me to believe that what happens between husband and wife is sacred. But I will say this. Jonas treats me with more reverence and gentleness than I have seen from men half his size. His strength is matched only by his kindness. I count myself the fortunate one." "Well said," Mary Sullivan murmured from the corner. Clara had passed the test. The conversation shifted to recipes and weather, the ice officially broken. By the time Jonas arrived to collect her, Clara had secured 2 dinner invitations and a jar of sourdough starter. "How was it?" Jonas asked as he helped her into the wagon, his hands encompassing her waist. "Educational," Clara said with a satisfied smile. "And I believe we've made some friends. You defended me again. You are my husband, Jonas. We are building something. Maybe not a traditional marriage, but something good." Jonas covered her small hand with his massive one, his thumb brushing her knuckles. "Yes," he rumbled, emotion thick in his voice. "Something very good." That night, the rain softened to a steady drizzle, tapping a gentle rhythm against the roof. A soft knock interrupted Clara's thoughts. "Clara, come see this." She followed Jonas to the back porch. The clouds were breaking apart, and moonlight spilled across the wet prairie, illuminating the retreating storm. "Look," Jonas pointed toward the horizon. A faint, ghostly arc of color spanned the night sky, ethereal and pale against the darkness. "A lunar rainbow," he murmured. "My mother used to call them bridges between earth and heaven. You need rare conditions, moonlight, rain, clear air. It's a phenomenon most people go their whole lives without seeing." He looked down at her, his expression unguarded. "Kind of like us. Unlikely conditions creating something beautiful." Clara felt her heart skip a beat. "Clara," Jonas continued, his voice rough with emotion, "I know we agreed to take time, but these past weeks, I wake up looking forward to breakfast just to see you. I find myself saving up stories during the day, just to hear you laugh at dinner." He took a breath that seemed to expand his massive chest. "I'm falling in love with you. Not the convenience of having a wife. You barely know me," she whispered, her throat tight. "I know you take your coffee sweet. I know you hum when you're happy. I know you are brave enough to leave everything behind for a chance at a life here. I know you see me, not just the giant." Clara turned fully toward him, the damp air cool on her cheeks. "I do see you, Jonas, the man who carves flowers into wood because beauty matters. The man who reads poetry and stays up all night in a chair to keep me safe. I see you, and what I see is worth loving. His intake of breath was sharp. He knelt on the porch floor, bringing his face closer to hers, though he still towered over her. One massive hand cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing her skin with agonizing tenderness. "Can I kiss you? Really kiss you?" "Please," she breathed. His lips were soft, hesitant, ready to pull back at the slightest sign of distress. But Clara pressed into him, her hands coming up to frame his face. When they parted, both were trembling. "Stay with me tonight," she asked. "Just to sleep. I feel safer when you're near." That night, Jonas lay on top of the covers beside her. The bed frame groaned ominously, but held. Clara curled into the curve of his arm, feeling the solid rhythmic thrum of his heart beneath her ear. "Tell me about the Grayson property," she murmured against his shirt. "Why do you want it?" "It borders our eastern fence. Good water. We could double the herd," Jonas said, his hand stroking her hair. "Make it our ranch. Build a real future." "I like the sound of that. There's a larger house on that land," he added, quietly. "Built for a big family, though Grayson never filled it. I was thinking if we dared ... it could be for us. Built for both of us." Clara propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "You're thinking about children." Jonas's face tightened in the moonlight. "I know it might be dangerous. My bloodline. A baby could be large. A woman your size, we don't have to risk it." "I want children," Clara interrupted. "Yes, it scares." "My, but life is risk, Jonas. We'll figure it out. Together." "Together," he echoed, pulling her close again. The next morning, they put their plans into action. They moved to purchase the Grayson land, and realizing they couldn't manage the expansion alone, Jonas hired the Kowalskis, a Polish immigrant family that other ranchers had shunned. Jan, Katya, and their teenage son, Pavel, spoke little English but worked hard. They didn't stare at Jonas or Clara. They understood what it meant to be outsiders. As spring bloomed into summer, the bond between Jonas and Clara deepened. They were partners in every sense, working the books, planning the herd, sharing meals. Yet a wall remained. The careful. Touches heated up, but Jonas always pulled back before things went too far. One evening, frustrated beyond measure, Clara confronted him in the parlor. "You won't touch me," she said, her voice shaking. "Not fully." "Am I repulsive to you?" Jonas looked as if he'd been slapped. "Repulsive? Clara, you are the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. That's the problem." "How is that a problem?" "Because I want you so much it terrifies me." The words exploded from him, echoing off the walls. "Do you understand? In a moment of passion, if I lose control, I could crush you. I could break you without meaning to." He looked at his hands with loathing. "My strength is useful for cattle, but it could destroy the woman I love." Clara walked over to where he sat in his oversized chair and climbed onto his lap. She felt intense, every muscle locking up like stone. "Jonas McCall," she said firmly, framing his face with her small hands. "You handle baby chicks without hurting them. You hold me every night without leaving a mark. Your control is absolute. Because your care is absolute." She kissed him softly. "Trust yourself. Have me carefully, but have me. We have to try." Jonas closed his eyes, shuddering. "You're sure?" "I've never been more sure." What followed was a negotiation of trust and, bodies. Jonas moved with a slowness that nearly broke her heart, treating her like something sacred. But when he finally let himself go, just enough, they found a rhythm that worked, a meeting of strength and yielding. Afterward, Clara lay across his chest, tracing the scar on his shoulder. "No bruises?" he asked anxiously, checking her arms. "Not." "One," she promised, kissing his skin. though I might have left a few on you." He laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest. "Badge of honor." "We fit," Clara said, wonder in her voice. "Despite everything, we fit." "Maybe because of everything," Jonas murmured, sleep dragging at his words. "The giant and the fairy tale bride." "I prefer original description," Clara whispered. "A beautiful study in contrasts." With the deed to the Grayson property signed, life at the ranch shifted into a higher gear. They moved into the sprawling new house, and Jonas immediately set to work making it theirs. He replicated the modifications from the old cottage, but on a grander scale, dual-height counters in the kitchen, steps built into the walls, and a bathing room with fixtures that suited them both. The town's attitude began to thaw, slowly but surely. When Clara stood down the bank president who tried to cheat the Kowalskis, and when Jonas rescued the Henderson girl from a spooked horse without hesitation, the whispers changed. They went from cruel to curious, and finally to something resembling respect. "They're saying we're good neighbors," Jonas reported one afternoon, shaking his head in wonder. "We are good neighbors," Clara replied matter-of-factly. Mary Sullivan became a true confidant. One Thursday at the Quilting Bee, watching Clara's face soften as she spoke of Jonas, Mary leaned in. "You really love him, don't you? Completely?" Clara didn't flinch. "I do." Mary's eyes twinkled. "Everyone wonders, you know, but no one dares ask." "We manage quite well, thank you," Clara said with a steady gaze, causing Mary to burst into appreciative laughter. Summer blazed across the Wyoming territory, turning the grass a brittle gold. Clara stood on the porch, watching Jonas and Pavel repair a section of fencing. Even from a distance, the size difference was comical. Pavel looked like a child next to Jonas's frame, though the boy was nearly grown. "Mrs. Clara," Katya called. From the kitchen, her English improving daily. "Bread is ready?" Clara went inside, grateful for the shade. "It smells wonderful, Katya." "My mother's recipe." Katya smiled, her face dusted with flour. "She would like you. Small but fierce. Like wolf in winter." Clara laughed. "I've never been called a wolf," his compliment. "Wolf protects pack. You protect Mr. Jonas. He doesn't need protecting." "Everyone needs protecting from something," Katya said wisely. "Him from cruel words. You from those who think small means. Weak, it is good marriage." That evening, Clara and Jonas walked along the creek bed. The water was low, bubbling over smooth stones. "Pav is getting stronger," Jonas noted. "He'll be a real help during the drive." "You'd make a good teacher," Clara smiled. "Perhaps someday." "For our own." Jonas stopped walking. The twilight cast long shadows across his face, highlighting the worry etched there. "Clara, we need to talk about that. I've been writing to doctors in Denver, even one in San Francisco. They all say the same thing." Clara's stomach tightened. She had known this conversation was inevitable. "What do they say?" "That a woman your size carrying a child with my bloodline. ... He swallowed hard, looking away. "It could kill you. Life is a risk, Jonas. This is different. If the baby takes after me, ... the size. The delivery, ... His voice cracked. "I can't lose you. Not when I've just found you. You won't lose me. I'm too stubborn to die." She reached up and he bent down, so she could cup his face. "I want our children, Jonas. Yes, it will be complicated. But what about our love hasn't been? We will get the best doctors. We will be careful. You're braver than any person has a right to be," he whispered, pulling her into an embrace that swallowed her whole. "We'll wait a bit longer. Get fully settled." Clara agreed, though she kept a secret to herself. She had been feeling queasy in the mornings, and her monthly courses were late. The summer heat finally broke with a spectacular thunderstorm. The next morning, Doc Hawthorne's buggy rolled up the drive. Clara had sent for him secretly, but there was no hiding his arrival. Mrs. McCall, the elderly physician, said gravely after the examination, "You are indeed with child. 2 months along, I'd wager." The silence in the room was heavy enough to crush a man. Jonas stood by the window, his knuckles white as he gripped the sill. "I see," Jonas said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "What do you recommend? Honestly? Go to Denver. Dr. Morrison is a specialist in difficult pregnancies. She will need constant monitoring. We'll leave tomorrow," Jonas decided instantly. "No," Clara said, sitting up. "I won't spend 7 months in a strange city, treated like an invalid. I want to be in my home." "Clara, please," Jonas begged, turning to her with naked fear in his eyes. "Not women your size with babies that could be my size. There is a middle ground," Doc Hawthorne interjected. "Dr. Morrison could come here. It would be expensive, but possible. However, Mrs. McCall would need to restrict her activities significantly. Complete bed rest later on." "Done," Jonas said. "Whatever it costs." After the doctor left, they stood in the kitchen, the space between them feeling vast. "You knew," Jonas said quietly. "You suspected and didn't tell me. I wanted to be sure." He sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. "I'm terrified, Clara." She climbed into his lap, placing his large hand over her still flat stomach. "So am I, but can't you be happy too? Just a little?" "It's our baby." "Our baby," he whispered, feeling the warmth of her skin. "What if it's a giant? What if you tear apart? Then we will handle it. Women survive worse. Not all of them." "No," she agreed softly. "Not all. But this child was made from love. From the impossible love between a giant and a fairy tale bride. That has to count for something." Jonas pulled her close, hiding his face in her hair. "If anything happens to you, ... it won't." "You can't promise that." "Then I promise to fight," she vowed. "With everything I have, I promise to fight to stay with you." The news of the pregnancy tore through Ember Ridge faster than a prairie fire. Some reactions were horrified. Morbid predictions whispered behind fans in church pews. But a surprising number were supportive. Mary Sullivan mobilized the women to knit baby clothes, though she privately confided to Clara her worries about sizing. Even Mrs. Henderson, usually the first to cast judgment, quietly dropped off a beautiful hand-sewn quilt. The Kowalskis were ecstatic. Jan carved a cradle out of sturdy oak, reinforced, of course, to hold a McCall baby, while Pavel practiced his English by reading stories to Clara's growing belly. Convinced the child could hear him, Dr. Morrison arrived from Denver when Clara was only 3 months along. His assessment was grim. "The growth is accelerated," he told them, his hands steady but his eyes serious. "The fetus is already the size of a 5-month pregnancy. Your body is adapting, Mrs. McCall, but we are entering dangerous territory." "I told you I was stronger than I looked," Clara said, trying to keep the tremor out of her voice. "Nevertheless," Dr. Morrison insisted, "restrictions start now. No lifting, minimal standing. And as you get bigger, complete bed rest." "Complete bed rest," Clara repeated dully. "For months? It is the only way to prevent early labor. A premature baby of this size, ... neither of you would survive the trauma." Jonas, who had been silent as a stone statue in the corner, finally spoke. "Whatever she needs. Whatever keeps them safe." The restrictions chafed Clara's independent spirit like a rough wool collar. She complied mostly, but boredom was a formidable enemy. Jonas caught her one afternoon trying to help Katya fold laundry and nearly had an apoplexy. "You promised to be careful," he roared, fear making his voice thunderous. I was being careful. I was only folding sheets. You are pregnant with what might be a giant baby. Jonas shouted back, looming over her. That makes you more fragile than glass, Clara. If you break, I cannot fix you. It was their first real fight, ending with Clara in tears of frustration. And hormones. I can't do nothing for 6 more months, she sobbed. I'll go mad. Jonas immediately softened, kneeling before her chair. Then we'll find things you can do. Teach Pavel. Keep the wrench books. Write those stories you're always telling me. But please, my love, don't take chances with your life. I'm begging you. As Clara grew larger, and she grew immense, very quickly, the town's curiosity turned darker. On a rare trip to the general store, Clara overheard Mrs. Pearson whispering, "She's split like overripe fruit, mark my words. That giant's baby will be the death of her." Clara waddled into view, her smile tight. "Ladies, how kind of you to concern yourselves with my health. Though I wonder if that Christian charity might be better directed toward the widow Mason, seeing as her sons are still down with influenza." The women scattered like startled hens, but the words lingered in Clara's mind. The final months were a blur of confinement. Jonas spent every spare moment by her bedside, reading to her or simply holding her hand. "I feel like a beached whale," she complained one evening, unable to find a comfortable position. "I can't see my feet. I can barely breathe." "You're beautiful." Jonas insisted loyally. "I'm enormous. This child is crushing me from the inside out." "Just a few more weeks," he soothed. "I don't think we have a few more weeks," Clara whispered, gripping his hand. "The pains started yesterday." The next 24 hours were a nightmare of agony and panic. Dr. Morrison arrived on an express train Jonas had paid a fortune to charter. Doc Hawthorne was there too, grim-faced. Jonas was banished from the room, but Clara could hear him pacing the hallway, the floorboards groaning under his anxious stride. "The baby is too big," Dr. Morrison murmured to Hawthorne. "She's fully dilated, but the shoulders, there is no way. Surgery? She'd bleed out before we could close the incision. It's too risky." Clara grabbed the doctor's sleeve, her grip surprisingly strong. "You get this baby out alive. Whatever happens to me, you save this child. Promise me." Before he could answer, a contraction seized her, tearing a scream from her throat that brought Jonas crashing through the door, ignoring all protests. "Turn!" Dr. Morrison shouted. "The baby has turned. Push, Clara. Push now." She bore down with a strength she didn't know she possessed. It felt as though she were being torn in two, but then, with a rush of fluid and a final, earth-shattering cry, the pressure released. "It's a boy," Doc Hawthorne announced, his voice thick with amazement. "A big, healthy boy." Clara collapsed back against the pillows, the room spinning into darkness. She heard Jonas roar her name, felt his massive hands on her face, but the world was fading to gray. "She's hemorrhaging," someone shouted. "Clara, stay with me." Jonas begged, his voice breaking. "You promised to fight. You promised." And she did. She fought through the blood loss, through the fever that followed, through 3 days of darkness. When she finally opened her eyes, the first thing she saw was Jonas sleeping in the chair beside her bed, a bundle in his arms. "There she is," he whispered, waking instantly as she stirred. Tears tracked through the dust on his face. "There's my brave, stubborn wife." "The baby?" she rasped. "Perfect. 10 pounds, 8 ounces. Built like his papa, but with his mama's fierce spirit." Jonas shifted so she could see their son. "He's been waiting to meet you." Clara reached out weakly. Jonas placed the baby on her chest. He looked like a normal infant against Jonas's bulk, but on Clara he was enormous. "Thomas," she whispered. "We'll call him Thomas." Recovery was slow. Clara had torn badly, and the infection nearly took her. But as weeks turned to months, she healed. The town's attitude shifted dramatically. Clara McCall had done the impossible. She had birthed the giant's baby and lived out by his first birthday. Thomas was the size of a 3-year-old, yet he possessed his father's gentle nature. One evening, watching Thomas pet the barn cat with careful, clumsy hands, Clara leaned against Jonas on the porch. "We did it," she said softly. "We made the impossible work." "We did," Jonas agreed, kissing the top of her head. "Though I'm never putting you through that again. One child is enough." Clara smiled into the sunset, keeping her secret a little longer. She hadn't told him yet about the morning sickness returning, or Doc Hawthorne's confirmation earlier that this time would be different. She would be more careful. But that was a conversation for tomorrow. Tonight, she just wanted to watch the sun go down over the life they had built. The news of Clara's second pregnancy traveled faster than a telegram across the wire. But this time, the whispers in Amber Ridge weren't laced with malice or doom. Instead, there was a strange collective pride. The town had adopted the McCalls as their own living miracle. They call it courage or madness, Doc Hawthorne chuckled during a checkup. "I haven't decided which one you've got more of, Mrs. McCall." "A healthy dose of both, I imagine," Clara replied, smiling. Jonas's reaction, however, was far from amused. When Clara finally broke the silence in their kitchen, the blood drained from his face, leaving him pale beneath his tan. He stood frozen for a long minute before sinking into his reinforced chair, the wood groaning under the sudden weight of his despair. "You're certain?" he asked, his voice hollow. "After last time? Clara, you were unconscious for 3 days." "You?" Nearly bled out. "It will be different this time," she insisted, placing a hand over the slight swell of her abdomen. "Dr. Morrison is coming to stay for the final month. We know the risks, and we are prepared." "Prepared?" Jonas choked out. How does a man prepare to watch his wife die? Before Clara could answer, Thomas toddled into the room. At 18 months, he was already the size of a 3-year-old, a sturdy miniature of his father. He sensed the tension immediately and placed a hand on Jonas's knee. "Papa sad?" he asked, his voice unusually clear for his age. Jonas lifted his son, holding him against his chest like a shield against the world. "Papa is worried," he admitted. "Mama is going to have another baby." Thomas's eyes went wide. "Brother? Sister?" "We don't know yet," Clara said, smoothing his dark hair. "But you'll have to be the best big brother in the territory." "Yes," Thomas said solemnly. "I will teach them to be gentle." The pregnancy progressed with alarming speed. By 5 months, Clara looked ready to deliver. The discomfort was constant, but her body, having been stretched once before, seemed to know the way. The town rallied around them with a fervor that surprised Clara. Mrs. Henderson, once their harshest critic, sat by Clara's bedside one snowy afternoon. "We were wrong," the older woman admitted, looking at her hands. "When you arrived, we thought Jonas ... Well, we thought size determined nature. We didn't understand that the biggest men often hold the gentlest hearts." Winter arrived early, burying the ranch in deep drifts. One night, a blizzard began to howl, shaking the house with the force of a freight train. Clara lay awake, wincing as the baby moved violently. "Can't sleep?" Jonas asked from the chair where he kept his nightly vigil. "This child is trying to kick its way out early," Clara gasped. "And the storm isn't helping." Jonas moved to the bed, sitting carefully on the edge. He leaned down, his mouth close to her belly, and began to tell a story in his deep, rumbling bass, a tale of a lonely mountain giant and the hummingbird who saved him. As he spoke, the frantic movements inside her slowed. "You have the magic. Touch, Clara whispered sleepily. "I'm just terrified," he confessed in the dark. "What if this one never fits anywhere, Clara? What if they are even bigger than me? Then we teach them that fitting in is overrated." 3 days later, trapped by the snow, Clara's water broke. Panic flared in Jonas's eyes as he dispatched Pavel into the storm to fetch the doctor. "It's too early," Jonas breathed. "Tell that to your child." Clara gripped the sheets as pain washed over her. Dr. Morrison arrived hours later, half frozen but ready. The labor was faster than with Thomas, but far more violent. Clara felt as though she were being split in two. "Baby is stuck," Morrison shouted over the wind howling outside. "Shoulders are too broad. I have to turn it." The pain that followed was beyond description. Clara screamed, a sound that brought Jonas to his knees beside the bed, begging God or the doctor to make it stop. Then, with a sudden rush, the baby slid free. "It's a girl," Doc Hawthorne announced. "A big, beautiful girl." But the relief was short-lived. Clara cried out again, her body convulsing with another wave of agony. "Wait," Dr. Morrison yelled, his eyes widening in shock. "There's another one. It's twins." The room erupted into controlled chaos. The massive size of the first baby had completely hidden the second. Exhausted and bleeding, Clara had to find the strength to push one more time. "I can't," she sobbed. "You can," Jonas roared, his face inches from hers. "You are Clara McCall. You tamed a giant. You can do this." Driven by his voice, she pushed. The second baby arrived quickly, another girl, smaller than her sister, but still large by any normal standard. Clara drifted into darkness, the sounds of crying babies fading as the doctors worked frantically to stop the bleeding. She heard Jonas calling her name from a great distance, an anchor keeping her from drifting away completely. When she woke properly days later, the storm had passed. Sunlight streamed across the quilt, illuminating Jonas, who held a baby in each arm. Thomas was curled at the foot of the bed like a loyal guard dog. "Clara," Jonas whispered, tears spilling onto his cheeks. "You stayed. I promised," she rasped. "Meet your daughters," he said, shifting them so she could see. "This one is Rose. She was the big surprise 11 pounds. And this is Grace. She's smaller, only 8 pounds. Together, they nearly broke you." "But they didn't," Clara said, looking at the two miracles. Rose had Jonas's dark hair and sturdy build, while Grace looked fairer, with Clara's delicate features but a fierce set to her jaw. "No more," Jonas said firmly, though his voice was tender. "Doc says another time would kill you for sure. 3 is enough." 3 giants, Clara corrected with a weak smile. "Or 2 giants and a warrior princess." Thomas woke then, scrambling up to look at his sisters. "They are small," he observed. "Everything is small compared to us, son," Jonas laughed, the sound rusty with relief. "But don't let their size fool you. They have your mother's spirit." 10 years blurred into a montage of seasons, each one adding a new layer to the McCall legacy. The ranch had transformed into a sanctuary for those the world had cast aside, but the outside world still possessed teeth. One winter night, 3 drunken drifters broke into the kitchen, looking for trouble and easy money. They didn't find Jonas. They found Rose. At 10 years old, she was already standing 5'6", with shoulders broad enough to bear the weight of the farm. When one man sneered and reached for Clara, Rose didn't shrink away. She stepped forward, grabbing the man's wrist with the speed and precision Pavel had taught her. There was a sickening snap as the bone gave way like dry kindling. The sheriff didn't arrest her. The judge commended her. A child defending her home, Judge Thompson ruled, staring down the intruders. But the lesson stuck with the family. The world was dangerous, but the McCalls were not helpless victims. Time marched on, relentless and transformative. The railroad cut a steel path through the territory, connecting Ember Ridge to the wider world. Jonas, the man who once hid in the shadows of his own porch, did the unthinkable. He ran for the territorial legislature. They called him the Gentle, Giant of Wyoming. He campaigned on a platform of equality for immigrants and the marginalized, and he won by a landslide. For 12 years, his booming voice filled the State House, fighting for those who had no voice of their own. Decades spooled away until the silver in Clara's hair matched the snow on the distant peaks. Now 70, leaning heavily on a cane, she stood on the platform of the new Ember Ridge train station. Jonas stood beside her, weathered by time but unbroken, a white-haired mountain of a man. "She's here," Thomas boomed. At 41, standing, nearly 8 feet tall, he was the headmaster of the McCall Academy, a gentle scholar living in a Titan's body. The train hissed to a halt, steam billowing into the crisp morning air. Rose emerged from the carriage. She was magnificent 6'6", confident and radiant in a custom-made traveling suit. But the collective gasp from the town didn't come because of her size. It came because of the man holding her hand. He was slight, barely 5'4", with kind eyes and a nervous smile. Between them walked a toddler of perfectly average size. "Mama, Papa," Rose beamed as she stepped onto the platform. "I'd like you to meet my husband, Professor James Chun." The irony was perfect. Their giant daughter had married a small man. Later, on the porch of the main house, Rose explained it quietly to Clara. "He makes me feel normal, Mama. When he looks at me, he doesn't see a giantess. He just sees Rose." Clara squeezed James's hand, her eyes shining. "You found the secret," she told him. "Welcome to the family. You fit right in." The ranch had become a legend by then. A delegation from Washington, D.C. arrived the following week, sent by the president himself. They wanted Jonas to lead a national commission on equality and integration. They stood in the great room of the main house, marveling at the dual-height furniture and the diverse community working the land outside. "We'll do it," Jonas told the delegates, his hand resting on Clara's shoulder. "But we do it as a family. We don't just teach tolerance here. We live it." That evening, as the celebration wound down, Clara found Jonas in the original schoolhouse. It had been converted into a small museum of their life. He was staring at a tintype photo from their wedding day, him hunching awkwardly, her straining on tiptoes, both looking terrified. "No regrets?" he asked, his voice softer now, worn smooth by the years. "Not one," Clara replied, resting her head against his arm. "We took 2 people who shouldn't have fit and built a world where everyone does." "Look what love built," Jonas murmured, looking out the window at the thriving ranch. "Look what courage built," she corrected. Love was just the foundation. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the empire of misfits they had created. They had started as a terrifying anomaly, the recluse giant and the tiny, mail-order bride, but they ended as a testament to the enduring power of a Western love story. They had proved that giants could be gentle, the small could be mighty, and that with enough patience and stubbornness, you really could make anything fit.